Alright, what's up everyone? In this video, I'm going to talk to you about some things to consider when building a GPP lineup with our advanced lineup optimizer. And I think the first thing you can go ahead and do is just put an X in the GPP settings box. And what you're going to see after you do that is some values come into this area right here that we think are important to consider when you are building a GPP lineup. So for example, you can see that we've capped ownership percentage at 40%. I think you could even justify going lower than that, but personally, I think it's very hard to have a player over 40, who we are projecting or who you're projecting to be over 40% ownership in a GPP lineup. Knowing that they're going to be owned by so much of the field just gives you a massive advantage if that player does not perform. And even if they do perform, knowing that so many other people are going to have them, it doesn't really give you that big of a leg up. I think in very rare cases, you do have to include players over 40%. And of course, you can always do that by locking a player in with the GPP locks. Remember, you can't lock them here anymore. So let's say that LeBron was 60% ownership, but it was just extremely obvious that he was going to have a great night. You could always go ahead and go like that. And even though he would have been excluded by our criteria, he's still going to be locked into your lineup. But again, I think it's pretty hard to justify having someone over 40% ownership in your GPP lineup. Second thing we've done is we've said, don't give me anyone under 15 projected minutes. I think that's kind of should be a threshold for any of your lineups. There are cases where our data sheet will be imported at 4 p.m. and we'll have someone projected for 12 minutes, and then some news will come out that he's starting or that someone got injured. And obviously, in that case, you're not going to want to have this barrier because maybe he's going to be playing 25, 30 minutes. But in general, I think it's pretty hard to put someone in any lineup who's playing less than 15 minutes. Potential rating, definitely a big one for GPP lineups. This is a rating we create that looks at the standard deviation of a player's scores, the top 3 scores that player has had, and their salary to create a rating 1 through 100 of how likely they are to have a big game relative to their current salary. So for example, I guess just to put it more simply, a player with a lot of standard deviation from their mean score, so they're constantly scoring really high and then really low, and just a lot of variation there. And then also who has a lot of very high scores relative to their salary is going to be one with a higher potential rating. They have more potential to have a really big game. Whereas a player who's kind of constantly scoring around the same is going to have a high consistency rating, but then they're going to have a much lower potential rating. The next thing is usage. Again, similar to minutes, I don't think it's possible to put someone with under 10 usage points into your lineup. We don't touch typically value from player profile and salary adjusted DVP in the GPP or cash settings. I do think that when you're creating a lineup, one thing I really like to do is include a couple guys who have great matchups in every lineup. And how you can do that is you can go here and you can say, I want someone who has at least 10 value from player profile. And you can look through all the guys who still have points. So let's say we can see that Jared Allen has a really good matchup tonight. And I think 10 and negative 10 are kind of the thresholds where over 10 is a really good matchup, under negative 10 is a really bad matchup. And then I can go ahead and look through the guys who still have values here, knowing that they have a really good matchup tonight. So, for example, I know that Jared Allen meets my other criteria, has a great matchup from the player profile. If I wanted to, I could lock him in using my GPP locks. And you'll see that Y pop up in the real locks column. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove that barrier from the rest of the players. But that's just a nice thing I like to do when I'm building my lineups, to say, hey, no matter what my lineup looks like tonight, I'm going to have 2 or 3 players who have great matchups. You can do the same thing with salary adjusted DVP. And this is, instead of looking at players with great matchups, you can exclude players who have terrible matchups. So if you wanted to exclude anyone who is in a salary adjusted DVP matchup under 8, meaning that the team they're playing against is one of the 8 best teams in the league at defending their position, you could put in an 8. And you can see that ruled out certain players. Maybe you just want the top half. You can really do whatever you want in that column. Finally, consistency rating. Obviously not something we consider with GPP lineups. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the total ownership percentage. What this does is it sums the ownership of every player in your lineup. And I've found that it's definitely different on night to night and slate to slate. So, for example, if you're playing on a 4-game slate, the total ownership percentage of your lineup is going to be much higher. What I found doing is one thing I found really helpful is going ahead and cleaning out everything and optimizing my lineup. And so once I've done that, I like to use the lineup generated as building blocks for my GPP lineup building. So you can see that right away, the pure optimal lineup, if you will, is projected for a total ownership percentage of 76% and a total point projected for a total point total of 293.2 points. So now if I went back over here and let's say I'm building my GPP lineup and I'll make a bunch of adjustments. I lock in Chris Paul, I lock in Jimmy Butler. I say that you have to play at least 20 minutes and you have to be in a positive matchup. So I've put in a ton of restrictions. Now if I want to solve, and I came back here and saw that, let's say, for example, I had seen that my projected point total went down to 240. Then I would start to get a sense that maybe the restrictions I put in were too demanding. These are projections, of course, so there's some room for maybe 20, 30 points of variation here and 20, 30 points of variation in the ownership as well. But if you start getting into the case where you're seeing 40 to 50 points of variation and the ownership is spiked by 50%, then that's a time where you might want to start reconsidering some of the criteria you've set while building your lineup. And then the last thing I would say is just when you are looking at total ownership, you're not going to want to be playing a GPP lineup with 200% total ownership. Maybe on a small slate that's acceptable, and I definitely think the best way to look at it is to first optimize the lineup, use as a threshold and a building block, and go from there. But typically, if you can get your GPP lineup in the 100% range or even under that, you're going to be putting yourself in a really good position where you're playing a lineup that not a lot of other people are going to have, made up of players that not a lot of other people are going to have. And in that case, if you do run into the situation where you feel confident about the players you have and they all have great games, those are the lineups that are going to win a lot of money. So that should wrap up this GPP focused video. In the next video, I'll kind of go through the same thing where I lock in cash settings and then talk about the various values we get here and why we like to use those. But I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.